YouTube! This update is a day late. Sorry. I tried so hard, but it just wouldn't happen yesterday. And it's a little bit unscripted, so without further ado, let's just get right down to it. First of all, the weather has been totally against me. Every time I've gone out this past week, it has either been ridiculous wind, so all my materials would have gone everywhere, so that wasn't going to work, or it's been torrential rain, which is, I can probably find some shelter to hide myself, but no one's going to stop and do a performance in torrential rain, so yeah. It's been a little bit of a disaster. I did manage to get some performances done indoors. I managed to do it with the Tabletop Society and the LARP Society, but at the same time, it wasn't enough performances this week. There just wasn't. To combat this lack of performances, I have applied for a license to have an organized performance in one place. So, for example, if it rains, I can take one of those large umbrellas that gives a lot of shelter, so I can do the performance still in the rain. It doesn't do a lot for the wind, but it also means that I can properly advertise for my performance, because it isn't just a busking, spur of the moment type performance which I can move around. It's a permanent space for 5 hours in one space, and I'm going to put my flyers in places and stuff like that, so that's going to happen this week. Some of the changes I've made is that I've added some more archetype characters. So the 5 races that an audience member can play are a half-elf, a half-orc, a human, which are pretty much bog standard sort of special races that you can play in any sort of fantasy realm, but also gnome, which are kind of like, in my sort of world, they're more like imps, sort of magical little jovial small 4-foot things, and a minotaur, because I wanted to add a race that they could play as evil if they wanted to. If you play as a half-elf or a human or even an orc, most people trying to play them as good guys, but having a minotaur there and directly saying that yes, minotaurs in terms of fantasy are usually the bad guys. If you want to play as a bad guy in my piece, you totally can do that. The main race that they were playing was half-elf, around about 85% of the time it was a half-elf. I just wanted to open the horizons a little bit without overwhelming certain members of my audience. I've also come up with an alignment system for the personalization of the characters, which I talked about in the previous video, and here it is. This is a grid I made full of what the character alignment entails, and an example for people that don't necessarily know how the alignment system works. I'm using the alignment system from 3.5 and before of D&D, which is that there are 2 sides. There's the scale of whether or not you're good or bad, so it goes good, neutral, which is neither good nor bad, or evil. And then you have the other side, which is whether or not you're lawful or chaotic, so it goes lawful, neutral, chaotic. In terms of the lawful chaotic, it's the one thing that people don't tend to understand. Basically, if you're lawful, you have a strong moral code that you follow. Sometimes it's the law of the land, sometimes it's the law of your people, sometimes it's just the law of you, of what you think is good or bad, your version of how the world should work, your own personal moral code. If you follow something stringently, that is lawful. On the other end, chaotic, it's more they shirk any sort of tradition or moral value of other people. They have their own sort of way of life. They can appear sporadic and random, but they love personal freedom, and also their methods are quite unorthodox. But in terms of whether you're good or evil, that it affects what kind of chaotic you are. For example, a chaotic good person would be like Robin Hood, whereas a chaotic evil person would probably be someone like Moriarty, who's very, very twisted. In terms of what neutral means, it means that it just doesn't affect you. That balance of whether you're good or evil, chaotic or neutral, you're on the middle point. Sometimes you can fall onto either side of the category, but you are kind of you don't see that struggle important. It's just the fact that a character who is neutral is balanced but can fall marginally in any of the alignments. If I went through the whole thing, it would probably take forever, so I'm not going to do that. What else is there? Yes, combat system. What many people have said in the feedback that I've got for the past 6 weeks is the fact that they would love to have a combat system. Basically, so far I've just been like, what do you want to do? And if what they want to do involves fighting, then they can roll a dice, and I roll a dice, and I've basically been like balancing out like that. Like it would be if we were actually playing D&D, it would be if I rolled high, it would be harder to beat the thing. If you rolled high, then you can beat the area easily. I haven't implemented the hard fast rules of combat of D&D into this piece because it's one of the reasons why D&D takes such a long time is the fact that combat can last for so long. But I have tried to implement some sort of actual hard and fast rules combat system. The main thing is that not many people have wanted to do combat. Most of the time people do want to use diplomacy and talking and try and find the puzzle and fix the puzzle without breaking everything. But of course, I want that option to be there. So I've tried to come up with a combat system with hard and fast rules. And hopefully, before the end of my performance, someone will want to try the combat system. So yes, this is my final push for performances. This is why I'm doing the licensing thing and advertising and trying to get my rabbit hole out there. It's because this is going to be my last push for performances. So I want as many performances as I can this week. It's been kind of hard. I think because I've decided to do mobile performances and try and get everyday people off the street, it has been rather difficult to do that. And I think that if I ever did the project again in terms of my evaluation, it's one thing I would change. I would try and get an actual space and try and get and advertise and actually get people to come to me rather than trying to get people off the street to come to me, if you know what I mean. It was a lot harder than I thought it would be. In terms of what I'm going to do after my performances, it's going to be the evaluation stage of my PIC project. So I'm going to be looking at the notes that I've collected, do all the performances that I've done, and try and come up with things that I think are important to take on in the future, so like a checklist. Also, I will be trying to create a score for a final year performance that will be, I think it's going to be based around this initial idea, but try and make it, instead of being a tabletop game, I want to make it live action, which will be very interesting of how I decide to develop this into live action. If you've stayed with me so far, thank you so much. To everyone that's watched all these videos, if this is your first video, there is a link in the description of previous playlists so you can catch up, but this is basically it, and I will see you next time, hopefully on time.